Thanks for being here with our impending snowstorm. I am Carmen Gillespie and I direct the Griot Institute for Africana Studies. And this semester we are focusing this spring on the Black Body Reconsidered. Both questions about what is a body, what is blackness, and what does that mean in a multidisciplinary sense. This evening's lecture is sponsored by Art and Art History and the University Lectureship Committee, of course, along with the Griot. And again, we thank you so much for being here. Our next lecture will be on February 22nd, so we're skipping a week, and that is on Caribbean queer. We hope you'll join us for that, Rosamund King, on the 22nd of February. But without any further ado, I introduce to you Professor Tulu Bayar from the Art Department, who will introduce our guest for the evening, Nona Faustine Simmons. Thank you.
Good evening. Hi, you can hear me?
Yes.
Good, great. I don't do well with the microphones, so please. And after 2 glasses of wine, I'm going to attend reading a poem right now. So, if I stand in my window, naked in my own house, and press my breasts against the window pane, like blackbirds pushing against glass, because I'm somebody in a new thing. And if the men come to stop me in my own house, naked in my own window, saying I have offended him, I have offended his gods, let him watch my black body push against my own glass. Let him discover self. Let him run naked through the streets, crying, praying in tongues. Quote, this poem by Lucille Clifton, which is not titled, was published in the 1970s and clarifies for me what Faustine accomplishes with her self-portraits. Says Seth Rodney in his hyperallergenic article about Nona Faustine Simmons' work. Born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, Nona Faustine Simmons is a graduate of the School of Visual Arts and the International Center of Photography at Bard College MFA program. Her work has been published in a variety of media outlets, numerous media outlets, and I'm just actually telling a few up here: New York Times, Huffington Post, Hyperallergenic, Grey Book Magazine, Village Voice, The Guardian, and the Brooklyn Rain. Her work exploring the question what it means to be a woman in the 21st century focuses broadly on identity and representation and history. Her work has been widely exhibited in New York and all around, and became part of the permanent collection of the Studio Museum of Harlem. For me, her work is a really good example of an intersection between performance and photography. She really sets an extremely good example of how photography, more than ever, can be more important today, and why we need photography, the medium of photography, and artists like her. So I'm not going to keep you long because her work is extremely powerful and beautiful. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming her to the stage.
Thank you, Tua, and certainly glad I didn't have that extra glass of wine, because it would be turning into something totally different here tonight. I'm a lightweight. But, you know, and thinking about my presentation, you know, it's really not hard. It's really hard, I think, for artists to verbalize something which is so deep and profound within them. And I understand Carrie Mae Weems was here in the fall, and she said that art is, most of what we do is very intuitive, and I'm so reminded of that, and how something that comes from your soul, really, you find the words to express. And I think that's why I'm a visual artist, because, you know, that's how I see. But I really deeply, profoundly would like to thank Carmen Gillespie and Tula Bear. Thank you so much for having me come to Bucknell University. It's my first time in Pennsylvania. I think the last time I was here, I was in Philadelphia. I was on a class trip, but this is totally different. So with that, let's get started. So I'll just give you a little background. At first, I had not practiced my craft for many years before deciding to go back into photography. And the catalyst that changed all that was becoming a mother. And I decided, what do artists do? They use what's around them and their world around them to talk about and bring it to you, rather, the presence of. And so I wanted to really look at my life as a mother, as a single mother. I knew that I wasn't seeing a lot of images of single Black women. That was, to me, abundance of what was missing. And so I started looking within myself and my family. We are 3 generations that live in the same household, and my daughter, who is half Chinese, she's a departure, but she's of course part of me, but I call it Nona 2.0. Is she being half Chinese? And you know, I really come from, I'd say, 5 generations of women that really has been present in my life. And my mother, who is very strong in bringing to life all those women that were in her upbringing, her grandmother, her mother, her great-grandmother, and the stories that they impressed upon her. I come from a strong background of women on my mother and father's side, and so those stories and that female presence really dominated my life. And I'm going to go in between talking about the images and reading things that I had wrote regarding them. I was born female and brown. The journey to loving my true self and the ability to tap the power within has been long and hard. When I became a mother, my life changed, and my daughter's birth brought a new strength, embracing all of me and the changes in my body. I am unapologetic in the declaration of Black beauty in all its forms. The political and historical oppression of our bodies comes with boiling tension and restrictions of who we are. In this climate, the ultimate battle to self-love and acceptance in defiance of the patriarchy is a revolutionary act by the Black woman. And in these images, I had just begun grad school. I'm a graduate of 2013, and I was in a very demanding program, one that I really credit with making me the photographer that I am today. Even though the director of the program, Nayland Blake, will say, no, we didn't. But recently. He told me that, and I was like, yes, you did. But I think at any point it was crucial to me as an artist and becoming a stronger one. And these images were taken at the beginning of that program where I really felt like I was fighting for my life and with my little girl by my side. And so I had had this horrible kitchen accident where I was cooking and the grease just splattered up upon my chest, and I was like, one more added thing, you know. I was broke. I had invested in this grad school program, and here I was. And so I just, this is how I responded to all of those pressures. But there was this spirit in me that just was like, we gotta make this happen. And so I just bandaged myself and my arms like I was a fighter, and I just went on this roof, and I started performing. It was on the roof of where I live. And I just, I don't really call my work performance, but I'm getting more and more closer to the acceptance that it is a kind of performance. And it's a kind of, for me, but it was a necessary expression of how I was feeling and how I feel and felt throughout this journey in my life and at this point in my life. So there were two images of women that I kept on my wall in my studio. And this one is Delia. In 1850, on a plantation in South Carolina, a young woman, her name only recorded as Delia, a face that reflected my own and the women in my family. A face symbolized the history, pain, and struggle of Black womanhood in America. The sadness in her eyes reached across time and asked me to consider myself in her place. I would look to her and ask questions that she could not answer. What she gave to me was a strength to keep going and asking and seeking questions. Part of the terrifying idea of this picture to me is what happened after the daguerreotype was taken. And these images were part of anywhere from, I think they say 300 that are in the Harvard Peabody Museum, taken of slaves on this plantation, commissioned by Louis Agassiz, and J.T. Zealy was the daguerreotypist. And they first came to me, I think through Carrie Mae Williams' work, definitely they're in her work, in a masterful piece called From Here I Saw and I Cried. And she did a remarkable, incredible piece with them. And the other one was Venus Hottentot, Sarah Bartman. And I first uncovered her image in a book in the Metropolitan Museum of Art's gift shop. And many, many years before I even, I think, started seriously practicing photography, her image and her story, she was lured from South Africa by a doctor to Europe with the promise of a job, and once she got there, she was enslaved. And she was put on view in a cage, in a full body, natural bodysuit. And her figure was such that she created such a sensation around Europe. You know, she had a very large buttocks, you know, very full figure, as you can see here. And in the end, when she died, very young, very soon, you know, she didn't stay in Europe very long. I mean, she was paraded around London and Paris. They created all kinds of shows and theaters and cards and music about her. And she soon died. And we don't know a lot about her either, but what they did to her in death is the real crime, I think. And that they cut up her body and pickled and put it on display, where she remained in a Paris museum on display till the 90s, I think, when the South Africa asked for her remains back. And so these two women played a very important part in me identifying with them in just all these different levels of their image being disparaged, stereotyped, and their bodies being desecrated in many ways. And I think many ways they also pushed me to answer back the crime, in some kind of way, the crime that was committed against them. And so the first image from the White Shoes series was an answer to those images you just saw of Delia and of Venus Hottentot. And this image was taken in my home in the studio. And I just was adamant about it being nude. But I added some extra items to it where you see I have a crown on. So, and white gloves and the white shoes. So it's like, you know, I was really projecting this, I am a woman, I am a human being. Is this all you see? But yeah, I'm reclaiming in my own way my body and my visual image. So Walt Whitman wrote in The Leaves of Grass, past and present and future are not disjoined but joined. The greatest poet forms the consistence of what is to be from what has been and is. He drags the dead out of their coffins and stands them up and stands them again on their feet. He says to the past, rise and walk before me that I may realize you. Can you inherit a memory of trauma? How does one generation respond to the enduring struggle, pain, and conflicts of the previous one? Unsettled debts and crimes gone acknowledged. And so I began, once I created within me, in my mind, the White Shoes series, I immediately went to the first place that I really truly, I think, found myself. And I had spent the summer on the beach with my daughter. I had never done that. I had never wore a bathing suit. And so I spent the summer looking at bodies, at New York bodies, all kinds of Russian ladies. There were older Italian guys. There were, you know, Latino girls. There was just a mix of New York City bodies. And I was shocked, you know, but I was pleasantly shocked because it was like I had a kind of freedom there in New York City. No one really cares, you know, in a way. And so that gave me permission in many ways to celebrate who I was and to just unapologetically go out there and be me in my own skin. And so after the summer was over, I knew that was this place that I wanted to begin the project, because in colonial times, after New York was one of the first states to abolish slavery before everyone else in the South in particular, but there were still slave ships smuggling the enslaved up the coast of Brooklyn. And I often thought about that as I spent the summer on the beach, just the vision of seeing these slave ships coming up the coast and with their embargo of human beings. And if you were one of those human beings, how you would just to escape that ship, the horrors of that ship, and just to be there on the rocks was a safe space. And the title of this piece was like a pregnant corpse, the ship expelled her into the patriarchy. And oftentimes I use titles like that, very long titles, to help the viewer and place the viewer in the mind frame of what I'm trying to communicate to them. And so we started there, and this was a warm October. People were still on the beach, and I was terrified, but I knew I had to start somewhere, and I had to do it that day. And I brought my sister, who is my assistant, Shannon, and she's the one who stays with the camera at all times and presses the shutter on my command. And I usually compose the shot using her as a stand-in oftentimes. And then I come out and I check and I go back and forth. But it's just a little tidbit. And this one is called Even the Comfort of a Stone Would Be a Gain. And so oftentimes I have to, or I like to, form narratives to help me compose images. And this by this time it was November, it was very cold. And I also use the idea of Greek mythology. I grew up learning a lot about that. That was taught in New York City schools a lot. And I find that it works its way into my work oftentimes. And so that story of the sirens that call the ships to the rocks to crash upon, I imagined once she freed herself from that ship, this is her home and this is where she stays. And I was in the lab printing this one day, and the photographer, Dina Lawson, she saw the image and she said, "You made yourself into a goddess." And I was so struck because I didn't realize that that's what she had saw. And then the bird came into the image at like this perfect time, and it just took on new meaning when she said that. So, analyzing a legacy that has been handed down to us, a scripted revision of lies, we will add a new piece to the puzzle. And when I first started the White Shoe series, I used to talk a lot about my ideas of history, handed down trauma, and the legacy of pain and struggle in the African American community. I felt strongly that all the horrors of slavery had not fully been dealt with among not only us, but the greater American. I felt like those issues that plagued us now are in the past. You can find answers to that in the past, and I felt like that is something that we had to strongly deal with first, what happened then, because I feel like all of it has not been uncovered. All of it has not been dealt with. And I feel that the White Shoes, for me in particular, is an investigation, not only of handed down legacy of trauma and pain, but a history where we have not been told everything. And then I often ask myself, do we want to know everything? And what that means. But I feel very definite that our journey to healing is back there. And so after spending a couple of months on the coast of Brooklyn, really the Atlantic coast, facing what would be the transatlantic slave trade, and that deep, profound cemetery of water, which the Atlantic is, filled with our ancestors, I decided to go to New York City, to the places where slaves died and were buried and lived. And in New York City, a lot of people they don't understand that we were heavily invested in slavery in New York as a city. New York City was so heavily invested in slavery that we bought their cotton, we shipped them goods. Slave masters brought their slaves to New York City for vacation. Slaves also had a very, very profound impact on the land and structuring the land and working the land. And I knew that the story was here at the Tweed Courthouse. Underneath the Tweed Courthouse and 6.6 acres of Lower Manhattan are a cemetery of African men, women, and children who have died. And once the city grew and needed more space, they closed the cemetery and put 25 feet of landfill on top and continued to build the city. And so that wasn't uncovered until a federal tower was to be built, and it got out that they had hit remains of an African burial ground. And that was on the maps of New York City. And anytime you want to build anything in New York City, you have to go to the maps. And the maps clearly said African burial ground. So that awakened I think it awakened in us like, oh my God, we were totally lied to, because in school we have been taught that New York City had slavery, but we ended it very early and everybody was free and happy. But that was not the case. And most of the people in the cemetery, the ones that they uncovered, were children. And from their dental records and things that they uncovered, they died mostly of malnutrition. So they were working the land, they were harvesting, they were farming the land, but they weren't being allowed to eat the food. So I knew one night I had walked through Manhattan and I got to this area about a block from here and I saw them digging in the ground. And I asked the security guard what were they doing. I had always loved archaeology, and to see this going on in my own city, I was just stunned. So he said, we found bodies, and later the city would just explode. And people were protesting, they were fighting the federal government to scale back or not build at all this federal tower. And eventually they did get part of their way. The building was scaled back to size. They did have a reinterment ceremony after they studied the bones of the enslaved. But you can see in parts of the land and how it's shaped, the way it slopes and bulges at certain parts. And so this part of the building and these steps are particularly new. And I remember one day after they had found the cemetery that they